Hello and welcome to another episode of the Half-Life Show. I'm Subu, fresh off a big bout of sickness which my kid brought back from school. And we also have Vikram here, who's fresh off a camping trip.
Hello.
It's been a while, huh? Since we did one of these.
It's been a while. Time slips by. We get sick. We have vacations. We come back and be like, how do I even connect my microphone to work? I had so much difficulty even hooking up my microphone. So I think we forget all these basic things once we divert our attention to other things. But here we are.
Yes, that's more important. I think the break was also much needed. So while I was sick, I listened to two audiobooks, Ready Player One and Ready Player Two. So this Ready Player One, there was a movie, but the book is completely different. It is a great book, right? I mean, it's up there, top 10 all-time sci-fi novels. I think it's a really, really good book. And even if you've watched the movie, you should listen to the book because it's completely different. But Ready Player 2, man, the sequel, oh God, I had to suffer through it. So if Ready Player 1 is like 10 on 10, right? Ready Player 2 is like, Jesus, it's like a 1 on 10 and it is an audiobook, right? I paid $15 and purchase this thing. So I couldn't just put it down. I was so stressed because it was like a 15-hour long book and I was just waiting for it to get over because I didn't want to put it down and because I paid for this. So I suffered and listened through the whole thing.
I don't know, man. You can't convince me to hear audiobooks anymore. I've been going away from that whole thing. I just prefer reading books, I suppose. I might read Ready Player 1 and skip Ready Player 2. But I've been going more on a non-fiction binge right now. I actually finished in this camping trip the book Sapiens, A Brief History of Humankind. It's like guns, germs, and steel kind of a thing, I would say. But it's much, much, much easier to read. I totally failed reading Guns, Germs, and Steel. I couldn't get through it. It's too academic to me. But this was nice. There are so many good examples. It's a very well-written book. And I got it done on the camping trip. I sat and read like about 3 hours a day, and every day I was there because I had nothing better to do. I just sit in front of the campfire. Sam and I talk for some time, and then we get into our own space. And I read a lot, actually, and even finished this book. So that's nice. The other one I started is this book called Psychology of Money that everybody is now talking about. And I see it on all YouTube channels. I figured I'll try reading that. It's not half as bad, actually. I'm actually liking the book more than I thought I would, but I'll let you know when I finish.
Okay, I have something to say about both those books. So this Psychology of Money, I went to purchase it too on Amazon. I just scrolled down to read the reviews and one guy left a one-line review. I read that and I said, yeah, that's enough. I don't need. So he just summarizes it saying, okay, don't waste your time. He just asks you to invest in index funds. I was like, okay, that's good enough. I'm not going to read this book.
It is totally true. There is no takeaway from it, I would say. Just that there's a collection of useful stories. For example, there is a little blurb about the third possible co-founder of Microsoft. And he didn't actually make it because he actually died in high school and stuff. And so even though he had all the opportunity and the same place as Bill Gates, it just so happened that luck took over and he didn't make it out. So those kinds of things. So whatever it is. So we had this whole episode on career success and getting lucky, which is our second podcast episode. I think a lot of the information from that book ties into that. So I was interested more in the stories of luck and career success and stuff like that, more than trying to get investing information out of that book. That's how I'm liking it. But,
Right. Actually, so one of the things he says is, even in the Psychology of Money, is that for most people, you just got to make sure that you don't make mistakes. You don't have to make guesses and risk your money by investing in startups and here and there, betting on who's going to be the next big thing. Instead, you just live a responsible life, save money, and reduce your chances of making mistakes, and then you'll come up on top. Yeah. And that lesson is good enough for most people.
That's true. It's also kind of a short book, which is nice. And it's organized into chapters that you can read in any order you like, which is also nice. So
Yeah. So the other thing is about the Sapiens, right? Yuval Noah Harari. I was listening to an interview of him on a podcast, and he said that for like pretty much all publishers rejected his book initially And at some point, he even heeded some friend's advice and he self-published it on Amazon. And then he pulled that out because even that didn't do well. And then, so this was like after many years and trying a lot, finally someone picked it up and published it. And it's incredible, right? It's a bestseller and millions of copies sold. It's funny how no one would publish a book like this, but then it turned out to be such a big success.
It's very readable. That's what I liked about it. Our podcast episode is almost devolving into a book review.
Yeah.
Escape, eject.
All right. Okay. So let's get back on the wagon. So this week's topic is learning from first principles, right? Or first principles thinking. So would you want to take a stab at defining what this means?
I can try. So there's a lot of schools of thought of what this actually means, whether you're coming from philosophy or whether you're coming from mathematics and physics backgrounds. But anyway, from what I understand of it, because my background is science-based mostly, is that you reduce everything to its most basic form and build it up from there. So let me give a couple of examples and hopefully that will make it clear to anybody who hasn't heard this term first principle. So over 2000 years ago, Aristotle defined first principle as the first basis from which a thing is known. So an example of a first principle is all men are mortal. So that is a first principle. Now, to this first principle, if you add any extra data to it, it will give you some new conclusions. So here's an example of adding data. You can say, Subu is a man. So that gives you the conclusion that Subu is mortal. Okay, so now you just used first principles to come to a new conclusion. But if you start with Subu is mortal, that's not a first principle because the question will then be, is Vikram immortal? It doesn't answer that question. So all men are mortal and Subu is a man, which means Subu is mortal. So that's why that is a first principle, right? So first principles basically give us logical relationships that forms the foundation, derive or conclude new things out of it. So that's what first principles is. And so if you follow the philosophy approach of this concept, Descartes, who was a French philosopher and scientist, he actually created a system, what is called Cartesian doubt. So what that means is he would take something that he's thinking about, okay, a topic or anything that it is, and he would systematically doubt everything he could possibly doubt until he was left with what he thought was a sequence of pure truths.
So he kept asking the question why kind of thing, going...
Yeah. So why does this happen? Why does that happen? Much like our kids ask us questions, right? It's such a natural thing. Our kids go through the why phase. Why is that? Why is this? Why is that? Until you reach the point where you can't answer something or you reach the most fundamental form where you start explaining, okay, that's because everything is made of atoms. If you hit that level of abstraction, you're probably in first principles domain. This whole concept of reducing everything to its fundamental form is called first principles. And it's actually the basis for Descartes' statement that I think, therefore I am. The elongated form of that actually is I doubt, therefore I think, therefore I am. Okay.
Oh, so, that's pretty good.
Yeah, so that's where all this started. So that's what first principles means. And what we are going to discuss today is basically how we can use this thinking for ourselves and find ways to speed up our own ways of learning something. Because I think there's a lot to be had. And so we can find some, nuggets out of some of the examples or go through what we've seen with other people and try to make some sense of it.
Yeah. And also this whole first principles thinking, it didn't really come natural to me. And what I have learned from using it over, now it's an integral part of my work and the way I think. And I think that it brings about a lot of joy. I mean, I find things a lot more fun to learn with this frame of mind, like having this frame of mind that, hey, through this first principles thinking kind of a thing. Yeah, definitely. I enjoy learning stuff more now.
So one other thing is that I'll go into a little bit more philosophy and pretty much come out of it pretty quickly because otherwise my eyes will glaze over myself and I'm going to fall asleep on the podcast.
Okay.
But
yeah,
here is the thing. what is the sequence of fundamental truths? That is difficult to determine. Who is to say that this is a first principle, right?
Mm-hmm. Correct.
So
you're right.
There are always going to be, and has historically been, a bunch of competing theories for what constitutes a first principle. And there is a method of separating one theory from another theory, or separating the riffraff. So what this is the principle of Occam's razor. Have you heard about Occam's razor?
Mm-hmm. I have, but I don't remember what it is.
So this is not like a law of nature or anything. It's somehow what is called a self-evident philosophical truth. And if you don't have anything else to go by in your entire toolkit, use this one mental model wherever you are going with it, right? It could be in physics, philosophy, whatever it is. The Occam's razor is this: the simplest theory that explains all the evidence is the best one. Okay. If you have a bunch of competing theories, the simplest theory that explains all of the evidence that you see and observe is the best one. Notice that it does not say that it's true or it's the correct one. It's just the best at that moment. Okay, so until a new theory comes along and is probably simpler and explains all the evidence, in which case that becomes the best theory. Okay, so that is the principle of Occam's razor.
Okay.
It's a nice one.
I guess the conspiracy theorists got to listen to this, huh?
Yeah, I have to find all the evidence. And there's more to this. Like, theories should also be able to be proven false. And there are many more requirements to what a first principle is. And I have a really good article on this that is in the show notes that we can read if we want to get more crazy into philosophy. But I'm going to end it right now. Right?
Yeah. This Occam's razor thing is pretty good. It's a good rule of thumb, which I think we've all used to an extent unknowingly, because when you have to make a decision in life, and if you perceive it to be a big decision, like say you want to take a huge loan and buy a home, for example, right? Now, it's a very stressful situation because you're doing this for the first time and you don't know what kind of risks you're taking off. So you can come up with all these explanations of why you should do it and should not do it and really complicate the decision-making process. But at the end of it, none of that matters. You go back to your gut feel, or you go back to the simplest reason saying, hey, I want to start a family, so I'm going to buy this home. Right? So you've had this huge 2-page long pros and cons, but you throw all that away and look, okay, I want to start a family, so I'm going to buy a home. So whatever risks and anything else that comes up, I just have to face it. I'll deal with it when it comes up. So you go for the simplest explanation for why you have to make this decision.
So basically, Occam's razor could be an antidote to analysis paralysis.
Oh, yeah. Especially in this world, right? Which we are, because there's so much information out there.
Yeah, we have a simplest thing we want to buy. You start reading reviews, go down a rabbit hole and be like totally confused and never buy it.
It took us like 2 weeks before we decided which mic to buy for this podcast, right?
Where the fact of the matter is, really anything would do.
Anything would do, correct.
So the simplest principle there is you need a mic, so get one. It's not really a theory or a perspective. But anyway, I think we can use that general concept to keep things in life simple. So that's what it is. So if you have a bunch of choices, pick the simplest one. Usually that'll work out just fine.
Yeah. So I think that was, you laid it out pretty well. I think that's a good definition of first principles. And I think we'll also get into some more examples to illustrate what it means and some examples of people who have demonstrated the first principles thinking successfully.
Totally.
But before that, I was thinking of when was the first time I came across this term first principles, right? And I went back to our 11th and 12th IIT coaching exams, right? I mean, these physics and math examinations, the questions would state something, prove that x is equal to y plus z. And they would often end the question with derive from first principles, right? So the statement derive from first principles, it usually caused a lot of dread in me, right? Because this meant you can't make any assumptions. They would give you this simple 2-liner problem and you can't make any assumptions about anything, and you got to prove that from scratch. And the thing was, these exams usually happened at 6:30 in the morning on a Saturday. And the both of us, and you usually had like 2 questions to answer, and you had like 3 hours to do it. And the most embarrassing part about this thing was that you would show up at this examination at 6:30 in the morning, and they would give you 20 pages of white paper to do these 2 problems. And because that's how much they think you need to answer all these questions, right? That's why they would give you like 20 pages. And these problems were always like way beyond me. They were too hard. And once the timer starts, I would just take 20 minutes and scribble something on one piece of paper. And all that I needed was one piece of paper out of the 20 to answer these questions. And then, bloody, I would look at you sitting next to me, and you write through the whole 2 hours. You use up all the 20 pages of paper and then ask for even more, right? Gosh, that is so freaking pissing off, because I was done hours ago and I didn't have anything more to write. And the thing is that I thought about this, and I thought that there is something to this. There is something different about the way a few people like you, our very smart friend Biggie, there was a difference. This is, of course, I'm retrospectively analyzing this. There was something different about the way you, Biggie, and some of our other friends, how you guys thought, and how people like me and a few people in my group thought, right? And there was this. What I'm saying is, there were distinctly 2 types of students. Okay. And so people like you and Biggie, you guys genuinely demonstrated independent thinking. Okay. So if what that meant was, if a novel problem that we are looking at for the first time was given to us, you guys had a very good chance of actually approaching it and solving it because of the way you guys thought. But then there were people like me, right? And a whole bunch of us. Our approach to learning was that we would work our butt off and make sure we would solve every problem from every textbook out there, with the hope that during the examination, we would see a problem that looks familiar. My approach to problem solving was pattern recognition. Right. So when I sit down for an exam, I look at these problems. All that I'm trying to think about is trying to match this question that they have asked with something that I've previously done, and then use that as the starting point to start solving the problem. Oh, I've seen this before, and this is how I had solved it before. So let me use this approach to solve it. So my brain essentially had a table of formulas of how problems have to be solved. And if anything didn't fit into this list of formulas of how something should be solved, then I'm pretty much at a loss. And what I saw was that what you and Biggie and all a few of you folks demonstrated was that, there was no table of formulas. There was none of that. You take a problem and knew how to solve it from scratch without making any assumptions. So, and I kind of feel like the way our education system was, it made us good in my kind of thinking, which is, you work hard and you solve a lot of problems and build up a database of formulas in your mind of how problems should be solved.
So you're reasoning by analogies, basically. You're finding something that you've already seen. You're like, oh, that's what this is. And actually, a lot of what I was seeing on the internet, the antithesis of first principles thinking is reasoning by analogy.
I see. Okay.
It is basically in my understanding of what I've been looking around, is kind of the opposite of first principles thinking.
Yeah.
Where you are trying to extend based on what, instead of breaking it down to the basics.
You're right. Yeah. Okay, that's good. So I think, solving based on analogies. Yeah, that's what I'm calling pattern matching. I think solving based on analogies is a better way to call it.
Yeah.
And of course, see, the thing is, I'm not trying to poo-poo one way of thinking or the other, right? I think even with this whole solving problems based on analogies, I think that also has its advantages. Because if you fast forward to today, right? We've been working in the industry for a long time. At a high level, break down the kind of problems that companies are trying to solve, right? Companies like, say, Google, Apple, the company you and I work for. I think we can, based on my experience, we can break down these problems into 2 categories. There's one kind of problems that companies are trying to solve, which are well defined. Okay, so for these kind of problems, they want people, engineers, whoever it is. They're looking for people with a lot of experience, because these folks have the ability to make decisions and hopefully avoid mistakes based on the work they've done. They're actually counting on these people with experience to bring their database of formulas in their mind and successfully execute this engineering problem.
Right.
So that's one category of problems. The other category of problem, which, for example, Google is famous for tackling is these open-ended problems, where the problem itself is not fully defined. And for these job positions, it's very evident. You can see how Google goes out and seeks PhD candidates and researchers or people who have demonstrated the ability to independently think in novel ways, right? And the root of this whole independent thinking and the root of this ability to think independently, I think, is first principles thinking.
I have an example that maybe will be interesting in this context, right? Mm-hmm. So let's say like companies need to make products. Okay, that's what they do. And they need to sell it, make money, and make the company have better stock value and shareholder value.
It's basically the bread and butter. Yeah, it's basically the bread and butter.
So there are a lot of people who have already defined what is required to make this bread and butter happen. It's not all invention. Somebody has to actually do the job. So that's where a lot of people that you mentioned, who can reason by analogy and who have seen various situations in various companies over many years, can contribute nicely to this mode of working, which is perfectly reasonable. So there's nothing wrong if you don't have that, fundamental thinking from the ground up mindset like you were mentioning. It's totally fine. So if there's anybody listening who also has that mindset, I think it's a very valuable skill set. But take, for example, a company which makes suitcases. Okay, let's just say that. Now, a suitcase company wants to make better materials so that it doesn't break in transit, bigger bags, many bags, small bags, big bags. So these are all kind of work that somebody needs to do at some point, right? Like you have to see what's going to make this material better or things like that. So that's fine. Reasoning by analogy is just fine. But every once in a while, even in something like a bag industry, right, a major revolution happens. Here's an example. Ever since ancient Rome, right, soldiers have been carrying leather messenger bags, satchels. They carry food while going across the countryside in their carts and horses and things like that. Also, remember that Romans had chariots. It's not like the wheel hadn't been invented. It has been around for thousands of years. People have been carrying bags on top of mules, and the mule has been, dragging a cart with wheels on it. But it's not until the 1970s when a guy called Bernard Sadow first saw this airport worker hauling this heavy machinery on a wheeled skid. And he's like, why don't I make a suitcase that has wheels in it? Do you know that a wheeled suitcase was invented only in 1970?
Right.
For thousands of years, people have been dragging things around, carrying it around without wheels, whereas wheels have been invented. So that's what I'm saying. So that is more fundamental thinking. Like you see these things like, why can't this happen? But the rest of the bag industry till then has been perfectly fine making really good looking bags and improving the quality of leather, making it more durable. That's just incremental work. They've been improving the function of the thing, but without ever paying attention to the form. So that's what ends up happening for a lot of the times. A lot of people like keep reasoning by analogy. Okay, the bag is already here. How can I make this better? How can I make that better? That's still a form of invention, but it's not fundamental.
Wow. Great example.
Actually, I would say that the tendency of humans to imitate is one of the fundamental roadblocks to thinking from first principles. Go down one deeper or two deeper levels and think about what is exactly happening here that I can use. Here is an example I'll tell you. There is this really famous military strategist. He is a famous fighter pilot, and his name is John Boyd. And he was so good in simulations of aerial combat that he did. They could put him at a disadvantage in simulations, and he would come back to win the aerial combat in 40 seconds. So he was called the 40-second Boyd, because in 40 seconds, he'll come back and beat you. He is actually one of the United States' greatest military strategists, and he's been involved in the planning of the Iraq War, Desert Storm, and a lot of things. He's a great mind, really. In one of his talks, he created this thought experiment. Imagine you have three things. Imagine you have a motorboat with a skier behind it. That's one. A military tank and a bicycle. Okay, what can you do with these three things that is completely new? So the example he gives is that you can make a snowmobile out of it by combining the handlebars and seat from the bike, using the metal treads from the tank, and the motor and skis from the boat. So, I mean, this is the idea of breaking things down to their fundamental components and building it back up.
Like that guy's basically like the Matrix. He could see through everything.
Yeah.
When it came to military strategy.
Yeah, so he did a lot in military strategy that is just crazy. But basically, this is one of his thought experiments of how to think fundamentally and how to first deconstruct everything to its basics and then build it up there.
I have an example like this in a different domain, which is food and cooking. You want to hear this one?
Yeah, let's hear it.
So there's this chef called Samin Nosrat. She wrote this really popular book called Salt, Fat, Acid and Heat. Okay, and there's also a very nice Netflix show on this. I've watched it a couple of times. Very nice show. Most cookbooks are just a book full of recipes. Her book is not really a book of recipes. It is more of a book of principles. Okay, and what she does is she breaks down cooking, all of cooking. She breaks down all of cooking into a balance of 4 fundamental ingredients, which is salt, fat, acid, and heat. Okay, and for example, here's a snippet from the book. I'm paraphrasing. She says, if you consider something simple and seemingly boring as sauteing an onion, as you apply heat, it goes from being crisply acidic and pungent to clean and sweet, and then to smoky and bitter. So half a dozen distinct flavors can be teased from one single humble ingredient.
That's amazing.
Yeah. So when she's approaching it, and if she's cooking a Mediterranean dish or an Indian dish or a American dish, she has an idea of how she wants her onions to taste. And she applies heat proportionally that much amount of time to tease out that flavor.
That's amazing. You know what? We both can cook to some extent, obviously, but I don't think I ever applied this mentality to cooking. Like, what would we have done? So what is the first principles approach to going through this? Take an onion, cut it into 4 parts, okay, and cook each of the 4 parts for a different amount of time,
right?
And then taste it and see what you can think about it, right? Correct. And then write down something based on what you observe and continue like this way. So that's what we should have done, but we never did that to learn cooking.
Yeah. And also then she builds from there, in the sense, so now we spoke about just cooking the onion, right? Then she says, okay, so that we've spoken about heat. We know what heat can do to the onion. And then let's talk about the fat. You have to cook it in some sort of an oil or butter. And you usually have, say, 2 ingredients. You have butter, and Indian household, you have ghee. So you cook in each of these for the same, these 4 pieces, and see how it sort of tastes. And then the same thing, you instead of don't even measure salt. You have a bowl of salt, take 1 pinch with your fingers and put it onto it. Take 3 pinches and take 7 pinches and put on it, and see how it changes. So you have a feel of what 1 pinch on an onion versus 3 pinches on an onion tastes with. So that's how she builds with heat, salt, and fat kind of a thing. It's very beautiful.
I think it's a great way to learn cooking.
Yeah. And the success of the book clearly shows that people really dig it, right? And the millions of copies that have been sold and a lot of YouTube channels since then. And what I realized is that after I read this book, and I've been cooking before I read the book, and my cooking style or how I'm thinking of cooking has noticeably changed since I read the book. The way she's able to break things down and explain it to a regular Joe like me and affect my thinking, it's an example of how powerful first principles thinking can be.
I like what you just said, because it's about the average Joe. One of the attractive things about first principles is that all first principles in generally most things we already know. Okay, like that we know that salt is an important ingredient and we know heat is an important ingredient, but we just know off the fact we don't really know it, right? And what first principles thinking does is it takes the inaccessible knowledge that experts have and gives you the tools you need to emulate or get there. So I think most people like it because of this, because you see what these people are doing and go like, wow, I think I can do it too. Now I can understand these basic principles. If I apply this and understand it and I have a method going from point A to point B, then I can also cook like these amazing chefs that I see on any popular cooking show. Top Chef.
What you said was good. So the phrase that you used, right? It's taking what seems to be inaccessible knowledge that only experts have. A lot of people, even when it comes to finances or this or that, even say if it's woodworking, it's very easy for me to say, oh my God, it's only for the smart people, or it's only for some experts in that field, kind of a thing.
Take woodworking as an example. It's a great example too. When you start with woodworking, you cannot make the gigantic furniture that you were thinking you're going to make. Start by taking scraps of wood and identify all the kinds of cuts that you need to make. Can you make a 45-degree cut? Can you make various kinds of joints? Do you know how to use glue? Do you know when to use nails, when to use screws? Do you know the difference between wood screws and not wood screws? I don't know anything about woodworking, but I'm just extrapolating here.
Yeah.
That,
soon to be woodworker. That's what you're going to be.
I have all the tools, by the way.
Right.
I just don't use them. But yeah, basically to identify the fundamental elements of woodworking and work on perfecting each skill. And then with those constituent skills, you can build an amazing piece of furniture.
Yeah. See, there's one example which I've always found this piece to be inaccessible, and the realm of experts and PhDs, right? Which is fundamental mathematics, things like calculus and all the stuff that we did through school. It's always hard. See, I did well at my exams because of my approach to problem solving, right? I solved every single calculus problem in every single textbook there is, so that when the exam came about, then the problems were all familiar to me. So I knew how to solve them. So that's how I got through and did well in my exams. But that doesn't mean, I understood calculus at all. I had no intuition about calculus. It was just about scribbling these weird marks on the paper. That's all it was. Now, just recently, maybe in the last couple of years, I came across this amazing YouTube channel called 3 Blue, 1 Brown. You've obviously heard of this, Vikram. And it is, in my opinion, one of the best mathematics channels there is. And I went and saw some of their calculus, some of this guy's, is one person. It was one chap's calculus courses. And the way he explains concepts, it is clear that his own understanding of calculus and his own understanding of these mathematical concepts are at a completely different level. Because I was able to, for the first time in my late 30s, I was able to appreciate why is calculus so important and what it really is. I want to link a couple of videos from 3 Blue, 1 Brown, especially these days where pretty much everyone in the news is talking about AI and machine learning and neural networks, right? So there is one video on where he explains what a neural network or what AI is. And there's also one video titled The Essence of Calculus. So I want to link these two videos, and I think people should watch it.
If people are interested, he also has a video on how to solve Wordle, which is the latest New York Times word game that has taken the world by storm. He solves the best starting guesses for the Wordle game using information theory and shows how he can arrive at answers quicker. He says it's not all about solving the puzzle, but it's a great way to learn information theory, which is amazing.
Any other examples you have?
Well, I do, but
give me one more.
I'll give you one more, and then I want to take this calculus videos idea a little further. But I have one more thing. When I was Googling and trying to understand more about first principles, there is so much stuff out there about Elon Musk and what he thinks is first principles reasoning. Okay. I'm going to say it right up front. I think it's total BS. And I think it has nothing to do with what first principles thinking is. Like, I think we have spoken enough about what first principles thinking is now to see what this is not. Okay. So here's the thing. It's about how he founded SpaceX. So Elon Musk wanted to go and, get a rocket to start a space program. And then so he went and found out how much it takes to buy a rocket. He found out it costs $65 million. And he said, okay, this is ridiculous. I mean, I'm a billionaire, but I can't possibly spend that much money. So what he did was he went to Russia and saw if he could buy an intercontinental ballistic missile, like an ICBM, and then retrofit it for space flight. So he thought about this idea. So it's cheaper. It was definitely cheaper, but it's still about within the $8 to $20 million range. Not 65, but $8 to $20 million. So then he goes and thinks about it and says, okay, what is a rocket made of? It's made of aerospace grade aluminum alloys, titanium, copper, carbon fiber. Okay. Then he said, okay, what is the value of those materials on the commodity market? And it turns out that he could make a rocket at like 2% of the typical price of the rocket. So what he did apparently was then instead of buying that millions of dollars of rocket, he founded SpaceX, and now it was born. Okay.
So is he claiming this is first principles thinking?
This is what he claims is to be widely touted as first principles. I mean, if you Google first principles Elon Musk, you will see so much stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, okay, you thought about the constituents of materials, but like, look, you and I want to go start a competitor to FedEx and we want to buy airplanes. Of course, we're going to go buy an airplane. Are you going to go be like, oh, I can't buy an airplane. I need to find out what are the constituent parts of an airplane and start up from the wheels. I mean, you're reinventing the wheel. Okay. There is a logical limit to this. And
yeah. See, I'm a huge fan of Elon Musk, right? I really like the guy and all the stuff he's done. But I think in this example, he's not, I agree with you. He is demonstrating that he is a good capital allocator. It's not first principles thinking. And he's a good engineer. He's a good capital allocator. And this aspect of him is very evident from all the successes he's had. So if he takes $100 million, he's able to think about capital allocation and planning in a very successful way. And that's the reason why he has multiple successful companies like SpaceX.
Oh,
Tesla,
I'm sure.
that, right? So capital allocation, I think, is what he's good at. I mean, no money goes to waste in some ways. Of course, apart from he's a good administrator in terms of building a team and all of that stuff, and people like to follow him. But I don't think this one is...
And he's a very hard worker. He's historically worked 100 hours a week, and now he's apparently scaled down to 85 hours a week. So, of course, I mean, he deserves all his successes. But I'm just saying that it's not an example of first principles thinking, which is what a lot of people on the internet say it is. And I don't agree with that. But I think there is still something to be had from this. I think everybody should go back and think about a little bit about what constituent elements comprise of something. And that could be a method of first principles thinking. Not only making something from raw materials, that's just a very basic way of looking at it, but one could always go back to basics. Like your cooking example was a good one, right? And also with this example is that, okay, you found that the raw materials cost you 2% of a typical price, but what about the fact that now you have to pay for the development, the research and development of actually making that happen? SpaceX had so many failed launches. All that adds into the cost of this rocket ultimately, right? So it's not as simple as it looks, in my opinion. But anyway, I think Elon Musk has done a lot of revolutionary changes to this world. So, I mean, definitely something that we can learn from him there.
It's good because the thing is that if you go and Google first principles, and if this is what pops up first, it's good that you're calling it out, because that's not a good example.
Yeah. So now I want to go to the learning aspect that you mentioned with the 3 blue, 1 brown channel. And I think one of the reasons that I am guessing it appealed to you so much is the visual sense it gave you of calculus. Okay. When you could see what an integral meant or what differentiation means, when you could see it with colors and movement, you now understand it in a way you never understood before, because you were not presented with that perspective at all. Okay. So now there is this big theory called VARK. Okay. So VARK, which is basically the learning model one should use. And it's a big thing in education. What VARK stands for is V is visual, A is auditory, R is reading and writing, and K is kinesthetic, which is learning by doing something. It is hypothesized, and I'm not saying it's true or not. Some people do say this whole model doesn't work, but I'm going to discuss it anyway because at the very least, it gives you a good mental model. The mental model is that you can learn the same thing in any of these patterns, and each person is different, and each thing you're learning might require a different mode of learning. Like instrument playing might be different from learning to draw or color something like artists, or cooking may require a different senses versus learning something like calculus. So I actually did a test, and I think you did it too because I made you take the test. I sent you the link, which will be in the show notes. So this is a questionnaire that you can go through to find out what your learning model is. And I did this whole learning model, and it turns out that I am mostly visual and kinesthetic. So I learn better by doing, and I learn better visually, but I also can do reasonably well with auditory methods and reading and writing. So I'm not sure what the scale of this thing is, but if it ever matters without any absolute reference, I got a 9 on the V, a 6 on the A, 6 on the R, and a 10 on the K. So I think a lot of people will score 10 on the K. I mean, it's like people learn better when doing something, I would say. But what's your score?
Yeah. So so visual and oral are pretty much the same. It's like 7 and 5. So I think everyone learns better visually or through sound. But the funny thing is that I got a 1 on read and write. So it seems like I basically don't learn at all from reading or writing. And at the same time, you got a 6 on kinesthetic, right? I got a 11 on kinesthetic. So I
got a 10, but you got
10 on, okay. 11. Yeah. A whole bunch of numbers here, but the summary is it seems like I learn best by doing rather than reading a manual or reading a book.
Yeah.
And it seems like in your case, you are generally good. It doesn't matter how the information is presented. You're able to learn if it's visual or through reading and writing from a manual, or if it is by doing. You seems like you do well in all.
Yeah,
ways.
I can actually like learn from reading and writing, and I kind of know that from my own experience because when I read, I kind of sometimes take down notes, not because I want to refer to those notes later. It's just that by writing it, it kind of cements it in my mind better. So that way, yeah. So, I mean, it's just, I think most people have multimodal learning mechanisms, but a lot of education systems are looking at this and going, you can't give a presentation to everybody. That's why some courses have hands-on labs and stuff like that. But at least when we were growing up, this kind of a mental model to learning wasn't really prevalent, I would say. So like you said, if reading and writing was all the method that was presented to you as a learning form, you probably didn't do very well. If you could learn the same thing by doing something, if you were taught calculus the way 3 blue, 1 brown teaches you, you might have done far better, right? It's just that it wasn't suited to your particular style of learning. And that's because it's individualistic. It's not like each person is different, right? So that's where it all comes down to. I have been playing music for the good part of 30 years of my life, right? But until recently, I really haven't given it much thought. And I started to realize that I can apply first principles learning to music. And the way I started doing this was I identified all the movements that my right hand needs to make to play guitar. Okay. The transitions between the strings. Okay. So my picking goes, I pick up, I pick down, or I pick down, I pick up. There are various combinations between strings. And I saw a bunch of YouTube tutorials and videos. There are so many guitar instructors out there, but there's this one person who really resonated with me. And his approach is basically this. He's like, look, you can practice all the crazy songs you want, but ultimately you're not getting down to the brass tacks. Just sit down and practice these movements and get your muscle memory and motor skill up to make these movements efficiently. And he says that a lot of people in history have used this technique. Like Steve Vai, who's like the godfather of all guitar playing, routinely watched TV and kept noodling those same movements on his guitar. And he says it in his tutorials too. If you find any section of music hard to play, stop right there and identify what is it that is not working for you. Are you not able to make this movement from this string to that string? Or if you're playing the piano, can you not go from one key to another key? Why? And work on just that. And then you will get better at it. Even Franz Liszt, who is like a great composer, used to read a book while he was practicing the piano. Because all he is developing is his motor skill. There was no TV back then. But he was like, read a book while I do this. So a lot of things you can break down into constituent forms and then work on those fundamentals. Everybody told us that fundamentals are what you need. Get a strong foundation, the stuff will be easier. But nobody kind of told us why. Yeah, it's because these basic principles form the building blocks for you to do the more complex and more expert things that you see people do. And never do you see how these experts got to where they are. You just see the end result because they get on media and this and that. Very few times you get to see the hard work and the approach they did to get there.
One thing I wanted to say again is that, see, even now, when I'm approaching a problem at work, or if it's in one of my side projects, and if it's a problem I'm trying to solve, I don't sit down and really think, oh, how do I figure this out from first principles? That doesn't come to me naturally. What ends up happening is I'm playing around with this thing. I'm just going down some rabbit hole, just Googling for something and finding links and reading for a whole bunch of time. And so I go down these rabbit holes for a good amount of time. And after that happens, through this experimentation, I get some realizations. These realizations are essentially questions, right? So when I'm given a problem, I don't really know what are the questions that I have to ask. I don't ask the fundamental questions. I just fool around with it. And after a couple of days of fooling around, I am able to ask the question saying, oh, okay, this thing is working this way because X and Y is happening. But why is X and Y happening? So for me to identify that this X and Y and ask that question, it takes me a little bit of time.
That's perfectly fine. You are using Descartes' method of Cartesian doubt. Basically, you start at a high level and then you ask why and go down to the brass tacks. That's a valid approach in my opinion.
Yeah. And also, and if you look at the way we were taught in school and how learning systems and curriculums are changing now, when we were in school in the 90s, it was mostly with a teacher standing in front of us and giving us instruction, right? That's essentially how we were taught. That's how the curriculum was set up. Right now, if you look at how kids learn, even in India, they give them a whole bunch of things. They let them experiment and let them come up with realizations themselves. Instead of telling them A to Z, okay, this is how everything works, they give a few things saying, hey, go and experiment with it, fail with it, and the kids are naturally able to reason and because of their curiosity and ask the right questions.
And the greatest attraction to this method is that the kids have a joy of discovery.
Correct, yeah.
That is the beauty of it all. If you have these few first principles and you could deduce something from it, it gives you a level of happiness that I can say few other things give me, especially. It's really satisfying to understand the entire picture. Initially, when you start a new subject or a topic, it seems like an enormous ocean of information. Your brain is buzzing with all these keywords and you don't know what any of it means. But sooner or later, when you break it down into its constituent forms, you see everything clearly. It becomes a few pieces that you put together in different combinations, and then you get different results. That's the beauty of going back to the first principles. Even now, when we look at podcasts that we're recording, we're always trapped for time, right? Like, how do we pursue our hobbies? We always have more hobbies than we have time for. So my first principles thinking approach for that is, okay, look, I'm a engineer, I'm a scientist. What would that person do? Okay, let's collect data. So that's why I have the Timery app on the iPhone, which I convinced you also to install.
Yeah.
And the point is to log all your items of time consumption and then look at it visually to see where all your time is going. I realized that I spend an exorbitant amount of time on work. I mean, on my chart, I see like it's almost all work, right? And then there's so little time left for anything else. And that really gives me perspective to think about, look, the fact that I have a full-time job is definitely a major contributor, but really, how can I structure my day regardless of that? And also makes me think about one day when I do retire, this entire big time suck is going to go away from my life. And now how am I going to make the rest of my life meaningful? So these are all questions that came from going back to the basics and just answering the question of, I don't have time, but really, where am I spending my time? Opens up a lot to discover about yourself. This is a long topic, I think. There's so many examples that we can go on and on about. But I think we should end this podcast episode and ask our listeners if they have any examples of how they use first principles in their own life, or if they have any stories that they have come across, to let us know.
Yes, absolutely. The best way to reach us or write to us is by finding us on Instagram. Our handle is @halflife.show. And if you prefer reading a transcript of this podcast instead of listening to it, then you can just click on the link in the show notes. We'll have a link to the transcript. And that's about it. Thanks for listening. See you next time.